Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. John's South Mount Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A housing forum was held in my riding of St. John's South Mount Pearl, that's in Newfoundland and Labrador, in September. Before this forum began, a woman in a wheelchair handed the 3 new Democrat MPs in attendance a sheet of paper. Now, the paper contained 5 words, just 5 words: family, shelter, food, career, and health. The woman asked each of us to take a moment to visualize what each word meant in our lives: family, shelter, food, career, and health. Then she asked us to take a pen and eliminate one. You have no choice, the woman said. It has to go. Then she asked us to eliminate a second word and then a third. I can tell you this, they were tough choices. Even hypothetically, the choices were impossible. I eliminated career first, Mr. Speaker, then my own health, then food. I was left with family and shelter. I remember the exercise leaving me with a feeling of desperation, in the pit of my stomach. The woman said the point of the exercise was for us, MPs, to imagine it. Her point was she's living it. She actually lives it. That was a powerful point. Mr. Speaker, there is a housing crisis. Even in Newfoundland and Labrador, where the economy is booming, there is a housing crisis. Just this week, there are stories in the news back home about 2 men struggling to make ends meet, struggling to meet housing costs in a boomtown. Rental costs have gone up by more than 18% in the St. John's area over the past 4 years, by 18%, which translates into some people struggling to keep a roof over their heads. According to the Newfoundland and Labrador Single Parents Association, rent for a 3-bedroom unit 4 or 5 years ago came in at around the $650 mark. Now it's up to $1,100 to $1,300 a month. So from $650 a month up to $1,300 a month in 4 or 5 years. That's an incredible increase. People are having a hard time coping with that. In many cases, they're not coping with that. Their income is constant. Their rent is not constant. The stories in the news back home this week are about 2 men, a single father with a young daughter getting by on workers' compensation. The other story is about a single man making minimum wage. How these men are having an incredibly hard time getting by because of the rent. The man on workers' comp has a total income, including his daughter's baby bonus, he pointed out, of $1,479 a month. His rent alone is $1,200 a month. So he has $279 a month for everything else. Everything. His daughter doesn't take a lunch to school. There's no money for that. He pointed that out as well. The other man, the single man on minimum wage, he heats only 1 room in his apartment and hangs blankets in the doorways to keep in the heat. And his rent is going up on March 1st by another $75. Where will that money come from? So right now, that original list of 5 choices, food, shelter, health, family, and career, has a very real face, a desperate face. I remember during the 2011 federal election, knocking on the homes of seniors in the middle of the afternoon. They'd often come to their doors in coats and jackets. They wore coats and jackets inside their homes in the middle of the afternoon because they couldn't afford to turn on the heat. These are the kinds of decisions that people are being forced to make. Rents are continually increasing, and for people on fixed incomes, seniors, that means something has to suffer. Food suffers. Heat suffers. Medications suffer. People often don't buy medicines that they need because these are the choices that they're forced to make. Labrador City is another boom town in Newfoundland and Labrador. The mining industry, more specifically, the iron ore industry, is doing very well. But the vacancy rate in Labrador West is practically 0. The local college offers a mining course that practically guarantees employment upon completion, but classes aren't full because there's no place for students to live. We heard stories about how women remain in abusive relationships because there's nowhere else to go. Mr. Speaker, I also visited Fort McMurray in the past year, Fort McMurray, Alberta. That's another place that's absolutely booming. The average income is $100,000 a year. The average family income is $180,000 a year. But the cost of rent is astronomical. A new 3-bedroom home with a double-car garage and an unregistered apartment can go for between $700,000 to $900,000. So you can imagine the cost of rental units. Meantime, the income threshold for low-income housing is about $80,000 a year. Mr. Speaker, there is a housing crisis. There's a housing crisis in St. John's. There's a housing crisis in Labrador. There's a housing crisis in Alberta. There's a housing crisis across Canada. Canada is the only G8 country without a national housing strategy, which is what this bill C-400, is all about. It costs. What does it cost? It costs nothing. It costs no money. It simply requires the minister responsible for the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation to work in collaboration with the provincial ministers responsible for housing, to work with representatives of municipalities, to work with Aboriginal communities, to work with housing providers in the nonprofit and the private sectors. It requires all of these groups to work together to establish a national housing strategy. Now, Mr. Speaker, how does that not make sense? That's smart governance. Between 300,000 and 400,000 Canadians, Mr. Speaker, are homeless. They have no place to live. 3 million Canadians live in housing insecurity, including 27,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and almost 9,300 in St. John's South, Mount Pearl, St. John's East alone. The Conservatives will say, the Conservatives have said, that their commitment to safe and affordable housing has helped over 775,000 Canadians since 2006. The Conservatives claim that their investment in housing has led to the creation of 46,000 affordable housing units. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, waiting lists across the country for social housing are consistently getting longer, and vacancy rates are dropping to record lows everywhere. Bruce Pearce of the Newfoundland and Labrador Housing and Homeless Network has described this bill as, quote, a life-saving bill. He says Atlantic Canada would be hardest hit by the absence of a national housing strategy because there are fewer support networks in rural communities. There may be loads of shelters, for example, in downtown Toronto, but not so in places like downtown Mount Pearl or places like it. Mr. Speaker, in areas of Canada that are doing well, where the economy is sizzling, the poorest people are suffering because of the increased cost of living, because of increased rents, because of increased everything across the board. There was another story in the news recently back home of how 30 tenants of a low-income apartment building in St. John's were worried that they'll soon be homeless. Their building is going to be redeveloped into condominiums, and they have until the end of April to move out. It won't be easy for those 30 families to find another place to live. Here's how one tenant put it, quote, every time they put up the rent, there's less food you have every month, or it's your light bill you can't pay. Yvette Walton, the head of the Newfoundland and Labrador Single Parents Association, told CBC News just this week, that rent is rising too quickly on the Northeast Avalon. That's on the extreme east coast of Newfoundland. She says that's causing huge amounts of stress, especially for single-parent families. She says that the solution is more affordable housing. The solution is more affordable housing, which is where a national housing strategy would come into play. Mr. Speaker, I'm wrapping up. Let's bring this back full circle. Family, shelter, career, food, health. Which ones can you live without? Family, shelter, career, food, health.
We're imagining it. That's what we're doing as MPs. We're imagining it. But there are people who are actually living it. Maybe living isn't the right word. Existing may be a more fitting term. It's those people that Bill C-400 is designed to help. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.